Now you can tell that we're getting close to the American Revolution and conflict is about to erupt. So at this time, I'd like to spend some time thinking about what war was like at the time of the American Revolution. Now remember, America at this time, the colonies were primarily agrarian, meaning that they were focused on agriculture. Only small pockets of craftspeople were creating goods, and this was mostly in the North. Most items were imported, and certainly most armaments. That raises the question, how would a fledgling country prepare for war? Small arms, artillery, accoutrements, and ammunition in meaningful amounts were overseas. Now, some were stored in modest quantity at old forts, but not enough to win a war. Only about 30 to 40% of men had guns, and half of these were not war-worthy or had ammunition. The British created a gun control program in 1774, which banned firearms and gunpowder importation. Now, sometimes people like to think that this armament program led to the American Revolution. But actually, the opposite is true. In 1774, the British were able to see which way the winds were blowing. They could tell that there was discontent in the colonies, and so they responded to that discontent by creating this disarmament program. So it isn't that the disarmament program led to the revolution, but more that the revolution led to a disarmament program. Further, General Gage, who was governor of Massachusetts, had begun searching Boston for arms and gunpowder. He was under strict orders to disarm all of New England. Now, as events spiraled towards war in 1774 and 75, patriots and royal governments raced to secure what small stock of arms remained. In September of 1774, there was what's called the powder alarm, as General Gage captured the largest supply of gunpowder in Massachusetts. Now, Minutemen responded in force and quickly, but it was too late. They were called Minutemen because they were supposed to be able to grab their weapons and their equipment at a minute's notice and prepare to defend the colonies. And what they found was that they were just a little too slow. So the colonials reacted by creating even better means of communication. Massive bonfires would be lit to alert neighboring countryside towns, and also cannon would be shot so that the sound could be heard for miles around, alerting the Minutemen. This would prove very important in the years to come. There was also an alarm in Portsmouth, New Hampshire in December of 1774. Paul Revere was involved in this one and actually, on a horse ride, warned of possible seizure of the American supplies. The Minutemen responded, this time quickly and in time, and seized the arms at Fort William and Mary. Now, these efforts would lead to further ones. In fact, some of the first conflicts of the American Revolution, such as Lexington and Concord or Lord Dunmore's activity in Virginia and Ticonderoga, were all about securing arms. We'll discuss each of these in more detail. What was proper military gear in 1776? Well, it weighed about 60 pounds per soldier. The largest part of that was the gun. There were two principal guns at this time. There was what's called a smooth-bore musket, which fired musket balls. Now, it was accurate at about 100 yards. The large round balls tended to get moved by air currents and would become inaccurate beyond about 100 yards. They could shoot about 2 or 3 times per minute. There was also a rifle that was accurate to about 300 yards, and this became very popular on the frontier. But it took much longer to master and also much longer to load, so you could only shoot 1 or 2 times a minute. To the musket was often attached a bayonet, about a 15-inch long triangular blade that could be used in hand-to-hand combat. The bayonet was responsible for about 1/3 of all kills during the Revolutionary War. The Army soldier also had gunpowder in an ox horn, and also a muzzle cartridge, which was paper attached to a musket ball. This allowed them to quickly load a musket. However, even then, it still took several seconds to load. They usually carried enough rounds for 30 to 60 shots, some spare flint to light the gunpowder, and a musket tool to repair it if needed. Each soldier would carry a water bottle, a knapsack that was filled with various clothing items, a haversack that was filled with food, and a blanket. A brown uniform was in short supply, so most soldiers wore blue or gray uniforms, many of them provided by the French and the Spanish. The uniform included a tri-cornered hat, a wool coat, waistcoat or vest, breeches gathered just below the knee, stockings and leather shoes. And shoes were the hardest thing to come by. It wasn't enough equipment. The colonists simply couldn't manufacture enough arms or secure enough arms to win a war. So they had three principal means of trying to equip their army. The first one was confiscation, and clearly this was the best one, because if they could take weapons from the enemy, it not only deprived their enemy, it also gave them equipment. But this was very, very difficult to do. Now, loyalists were targeted, and if a loyalist had a gun, that would be confiscated for the army. But even some patriots who had guns but weren't able to fight would have their equipment confiscated too. There were times when there were massive confiscations. In 1775, a ship called the Philippa was captured near South Carolina. It held over 16,000 pounds of gunpowder, which ended up finding its way to General Washington's army. In 1778, American naval officer Commodore Hopkins captured forts in the Bahamas, looting cannons, mortars, and armaments. So there were times when confiscation was quite useful, but it was not enough. Another possibility was foreign importation. Now, initially in 1775 and 76, only about 2,000 muskets were imported from France and Spain. But a year later in 1777, over 12,000 were imported. Spain and France helped the Americans throughout the entire war. Another option was domestic production and purchase, but there were simply too few craftsmen. Probably about 350 craftspeople in all of the colonies who could manufacture a gun, and it took a considerable amount of time. Washington was usually in short supply for arms and equipment for his army. Congress responded to his needs by forming the Department of the Commissary General of Military Stores in 1776. This department would oversee arms repair, crafting gun carriages and musket cartridges, and storage of military goods at Springfield, Massachusetts, Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It also created supply chains to quickly move goods and raw materials. The Springfield Armory, for example, was located on a major river and 4 roads. And most importantly, it linked the idea of manufacturing independence to securing liberty. That's an important idea. A country could not really be fully free unless it was able to manufacture what it needed for its own defense. That idea would lead America in the 19th century. The main point of this lesson has been this: equipment and ammunition was in short supply for the American side, and it was only acquired in large quantity through the activities of France and Spain. A rapid move to hold stockpiles led to the first conflicts of the American Revolution.